Star Wars, for example, is naturally interesting. And people just take that for granted. But the fact that people will line up to engage voluntarily in a ritual activity of that sort is a manifestation of something that's very deep in the human psyche that we do not comprehend well. We're not really smart enough to understand why people would line up for 4 nights for 10 blocks to watch Star Wars. You know, I mean, they won't do that for a lecture. And they wouldn't pay money. One of the things that your brain is very concerned with is relative status. That's wired in, by the way, which is partly why relative poverty is often such a social problem. People hate being low in status, especially men. Well, the male status hierarchy is a bit different than women, and women are pretty sensitive to status too, but they use different markers. Anyways, part of what happens when your status goes up is that your brain serotonin levels go up, and when your brain serotonin levels go up, you're less irritable and you experience less negative emotion per unit of uncertainty or threat. And so when you demean someone and you interfere with and you lower their presumed status as far as a very primordial circuit is concerned, you alter the system that regulates their emotions. And they hate that. People hate that more than anything. And it's an unbelievably archaic circuit. You can kind of tell this because depressed people basically act like they're low status, and depressed people are depressed about everything. Now, it's not easy to be depressed about everything, right? And so the fact that that's the case means that what's ever gone astray has to be very primordial because it affects everything. Anyways, people often use antidepressants to cure depression, hence their name. And antidepressants decrease the rate at which serotonin is taken back up by the neurons that produce it. Well, 300 million years ago, crustaceans emerged. And crustaceans live in dominance hierarchies, even though they're not particularly social. And if one lobster fights with another and gets defeated, then he won't fight with another lobster even when he beat for 20 minutes, unless you give him antidepressants, in which case he'll fight again right away. The reason I'm telling you this is because the status structure that underlies your being, not just your brain, but your being, is so old you share it with crustaceans. It's necessary for you to look at the world through a limited frame of reference. Your consciousness can only handle about 4 bits of information per second. It's not very much, given that the number of bits of information coming at you from the external world are, for all practical purposes, infinite. You're, like Aldous Huxley suggested, your brain seems to be primarily a reducing agent. Your body's a reducing agent as well, because there are lots of things that you just can't detect. And then the room that you're sitting in is a reducing agent because it's keeping all sorts of things out that you would otherwise have to deal with. And the stability of this city is a reducing agent because we're not going to be stampeded by barbarians with any luck at every moment or any moment. We deal with the complexity of the world in part by inhabiting a sequence of reducing structures until the world is reduced enough so that we can actually deal with the minute elements of it that we can comprehend at any one moment. And those elements we comprehend are not the familiar objects of objective reality. In fact, animals, and people included, aren't much interested in objective reality. We're interested in pragmatic reality. Pragmatic reality is the reality that you act on, not that you perceive. And because we're embedded in bodies, and because we're biological organisms, and because we're concerned with survival and reproduction, among other things, how to act is a much more important question for us than what is the world constituted of. So the world that we inhabit, given that we're alive, and given that what selected us to act, is actually a pragmatic world. And the objects of pragmatic worlds aren't objects, they're tools and obstacles. And they have valence a priori. They have value a priori. From the Newtonian perspective, you look at the world, And then you think about the world that you see, the objects of the world that you see, and then you evaluate them, and then you act. And that is not how your brain works. It's just wrong. You might see the value of things before you see the object itself. I mean, there are people, for example, who are blind. They have blind sight. They can recognize emotions on faces without knowing they can see. So that's partly because their retinas are attached to their amygdala. Your retina is attached to a lot of your body, not just your visual cortex. It's attached to your spinal cord. It's attached to your nervous system at multiple levels of analysis simultaneously. And so you can use your eyes to detect things that you don't know you're seeing. So, and what in some sense, what you often detect under those circumstances is valence, value. So you're very good, for example, at detecting teeth and predatory eyes, and the reasons for that are self-evident, fundamentally. This